So welcome back, guys. This is the second part of the history of the Commemorative Edition Corvette. As much information as I could dig up. So I hope it's kind of helpful if you're interested in this car and just to see what it was all about. So when my friend had his car built, he got a call from Advanced Automotive Technologies stating that it was ready to go, but they wanted his permission to take the car to an event before they handed it over to him, but they needed his permission. And this event was down in Bowling Green. So it was some gathering of Corvettes for some event or show, and they took the car. He granted the permission. They took the car down there to display the car. And because that was apparently one of their favorite build-outs, was his car. And so a short time later, we got the call that the car was back in Rochester Hills and ready to be picked up. So I remember we went down there, and I remember finding a newspaper somehow. I don't know where I found it. I don't know if it was in a convenience store or whatever. And believe it or not, it was dated May 1st, 2006, and for some reason I saved it because they talk about the Commemorative Edition Corvette, and there's a picture on here, and I'll try to get a close-up of it. But my friend's car is right here. They took a picture of it between two white ones. So I'll try to get a close-up of this article so you can maybe read it. I'm not sure if you'll be able to, but I'll give it a try. But I thought it was really interesting. And so the article basically describes the Special Edition Corvette and all the work that Steve Pasteiner had to put in to create it. So I'm going to show you a couple of clips of Steve Pasteiner and his son Steve Jr. describing and talking about the building of the car and how it came to be.
From a design standpoint, the C5 is eons away from the original 1953 Corvette. Blending elements of the past into the present was no easy task.
One in particular is that the dash to axle, which is essentially the door cut to the center line of the front wheel, is a completely different proportion. So that was one area that we were really concerned about, how the car would look with this much overhang versus the early car. The early car had quite a boxy front end. I mean, really, if you look at a C1, it's a little more like a bar of soap with rounded off corners. Actually, this front end perhaps is more representative of the SR1 and the SS Corvettes, which were about 57 racing cars and not so much the original C1. We had to kind of blend the existing vehicle, but still making sure that it looked like it was one cohesive vehicle, not just piecing parts together, you know, and the highlights, for instance, that flow from the existing door into the fenders, and you had to raise this area quite a bit in order to give it the somewhat of a hump or the acknowledgement of surface of what the wheel does in this location, because the headlight had to remain relatively high, so you couldn't really dive down because it's an exposed headlight. So all of these masses had to be kind of changed considerably. At the same time, we pulled the hood back just slightly so that it would cover a little bit more of the windshield, and therefore we've added length to the hood, a visual length to the hood, so it gave you a little bit more of the classic proportion of the long hood and the short deck configuration. Also in the rear, again, we had to continue the highlights or the reflections as they went the rest of the way. And actually it was kind of interesting how this highlight or the reflection tapers and ends up in this hot spot of a tail light. And then, of course, again, acknowledging the kind of configuration that the C1 had with the dip between the deck and the fender peaks, was another important area. The only thing is obviously the deck cut had to be substantially different from the original, and the masses on this car are far greater by virtue of the large wheels, and just the overall dimensions are greater than the original, and it has more of a wedge-shaped look about it, quite a flowing look. The proportions, for instance, the taillight is substantially larger than the original. Now, when you see the two cars together, they're quite different. When you see each of them separate, you think it's the same car, but they aren't. I guess in that sense, I feel that we've succeeded, and we tried not to mess with any of the wind seal or any of those things, which are, you know, wonderfully engineered pieces, and you can't improve on that, and you don't want to mess with that anyway because it's too complex.
We've done other cars other than white. We have done a couple of red cars that are very elegant. We've also done an anniversary car with the 50th anniversary red. We've done a silver car. We've done a couple of black cars. We've also have a Z06 that we are doing. We've actually converted into a convertible car. That's going to be an electron blue. That'll be very racy, and we're excited to see what that one turns out to be. Basically, once the car arrives, we have a check-in process where we go and we check in the car and make sure everything is correct on the car, and if it came in with license plates and owner's manuals and just different things, and those get all categorized and put into a box and set aside. From there, we disassemble the vehicle and take the panels that we'll be replacing off the car. From there, we fit our own panels onto the car, and they get ground and fitted.
We're adjusting everything for the correct gapping for hood cut, deck cut, door cut gaps, and so on. Make sure that the hood and the deck open correctly, and the car gets assembled virtually to a finished product. And once we're satisfied with that, then we disassemble the car again.
The doors will come off the car, all the panels will come off the car. Then the car is brought into the paint area, and we will then paint the door inners and the rockers separate onto the car. The panels have rolling racks then that we will do all our work on. It'll get 2 coats of primer on it. The first coat is a heavier primer that will fill any surface blemishes and such. It gets blocked with that. Then there's a final primer that gets primed. The car is then wet sanded by hand for paint prep. The car is then painted in the paint area, and from that it gets wet sanded with 2000 grit paper, wheeled, polished, cleaned, washed. From there, then it gets taken back to where the assembly area where the car is. All the chrome pieces are then fitted onto the car, the grills, the lights, the side marker lights. They are all bolted onto the car. And then essentially it's a big unit that will slide back onto the car. We go back to where the drilled pins were and then locate all those locations, and all the gaps remains true to that.
When we take the interior apart, that really looks scary because a lot of the wiring and the guts of the car is exposed, but it goes back together just as well. The base package is a two-tone red and white interior, and for that, you know, the console, the door panels, and the dashboard, you know, they all come out and they get re-dyed, and it's a PPG process, so it has to be absolutely clean, so we wash it and actually with soap. And then there is kind of an etching primer, an adhesion promoter, and then finally the color goes on.
And from there the car is cleaned and detailed, and we then have a 75-point checklist that we go through and make sure things work and things have been done and cleaned, and the car is checked out, and then it's a privilege. We get to drive them around a little bit and make sure everything is right on the car, and at that time it's ready to be shipped out back to the owner.
You know, years ago when the car was being produced, there was a poster that was made by a fellow by the name of Alan Olmsted. I worked with, I believe it was Sirius Studios, and he developed this poster that, you know, sort of honored the commemorative Corvette. And of course that was back in 2004-05. And just recently I reached out to him, and he was able to scrounge up a poster that I could purchase from him. So I was lucky. All these years later, I still was able to get this poster, which I think is pretty cool. So another thing about Steve Pastiner is he's quite an artist, painter, and I remember calling him a few months back, and I was telling him that I had purchased this number 109 commemorative edition, and he says to me, he says, "Would you like a copy of the actual order of the car? You know, everything that was built into the car," and I go, "Yeah, that'd be great." Well, when I got the package from him, he also had given me a sketch that he did of the commemorative edition. And another thing, when we were down in Michigan years ago, and I had never met Steve Pastiner, so it was the first introduction to him. And he said to me, he says, "Do you have any cars?" I go, "Yeah, I have a 72 Z28 Camaro and I have a 65 Impala." And he pulled out a piece of paper, and before I knew it, and I'm going to show you this, before I knew it, he had sketched both cars. And he said, "Do they look like this?" I go, "Yeah." So here's the sketch of the two cars that he gave me. And of course that was back in 2006. So when I got home with it, I had it framed, and it's been hanging at my workbench ever since. I'll never forget it. So Steve has even made a painting. So Steve has even made a painting of the commemorative edition Corvette that he was selling back in the day. And it was the 5th in a series of paintings honoring Corvette. I think of the Corvette SS, Grand Sport, the Stingray. He made all of these paintings, and I'll show you. I got a picture of the painting he did of the commemorative Corvette that I'll show you. So when Advanced Automotive Technology started to produce the cars, they came out with a sales brochure, and we'll take a closer look at this. So the insert in the brochure shows a number of cars with different colors outside of the white to show that you could have the car painted any color you wanted. So on the reverse side of the insert is a vehicle they call the Commemorative Edition Sport Wagon. It looks like a Chevy Nomad, and this was another vehicle that Advanced Automotive Technologies was producing. But they didn't make too many, I don't think. I think between 6 and maybe 8 of these vehicles were sold. So when you read the inside of the brochure, you can see how they were producing the sport wagon. They were utilizing the coupes, the C5 coupes, with the hatch instead of the convertibles. It's pretty interesting. So that's about the extent of the history that I know of about this car. So I want to thank you guys for watching, and you know, if you haven't subscribed, can you hit that little button, I guess? So thanks a lot. I'll see you on the next video.